Alright guys, this will be our AP Year video for Wednesday, May 6th, looking at Romanticism and music now. In addition to the impact on literature and art, Romanticism influenced the world of the 19th century music. Ludwig van Beethoven began to write compositions that broke with earlier classical forms by adjusting their length and doing unheard of things such as putting a vocal soloist toward the end of the last movement of a composition. Beethoven was able to break with tradition because he felt he was the first composer to earn his living directly with proceeds from the compositions and performances, are enough to not only rely on either aristocratic or religious patrons. Other innovative composers include Franz Schubert, who invented the Lied, or the art song, which involves a solo voice performing a melody to piano accompaniment. Hector Berlioz wrote pieces in which, for the first time, there was an attempt to tell a story without the use of singers in a written text, such as when he set Ghost Faust to music. Some composers made use of traditional oral tales or folk songs. Frédéric Chopin was influenced by the music of the peasants of his native Poland, and Franz Liszt wrote music based on traditional gypsy music. At the turn of the century, a self-stylized avant-garde sought to break with convention, so that when Sergei Diaghilev presented his ballet, The Rite of Spring, in 1913, the odd costumes, peculiar dancing, and jarring music by Igor Stravinsky seemed to be an utter rejection of every element of classical ballet. The artists were often well ahead of their skeptical audiences, and the premiere performance of The Rite of Spring was famous for the mayhem that ensued among the proper bourgeoisie crowd. Art. Romantic artists became fascinated with what they deemed to be exotic, leading painters travel to North Africa and to the Middle East to search of subjects. Also, their literary counterparts, many artists rejected the political order of their works. For example, Eugene Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People, painted 1 year after the overthrow of Charles X, captures the stirring of events of the Revolution in the streets of Paris. By the mid-century mark, photography was beginning to have a significant impact on painting, while also serving as a new art form in its own right. One of the pioneers was Louis Daguerre, who in 1835 accidentally discovered that he could produce an image when he put an exposed plate in a chemical cupboard where mercury vapor was present. It still took him several years to find a way to fix the image, a process that received the name of daguerreotype. Photography would enter into a mainstream with the introduction of celluloid film. In the 1880s, George Eastman introduced the flexible film and the first box camera, which made photography into something far less expensive that could be enjoyed by the masses. The development of photography made it increasingly clear to painters that there would be less demand for realistic landscapes and portraits. Some artists began to look to new subjects, such as those we refer to as realists, who sought to paint the world around them without any illusions. In part inspired by revolutionary upheavals of 1848, Gustave Courbet began to paint works like the Stonebreakers that rejected the romantic traditions of the day, and instead focused on showing the world of the peasants in all its grim reality. Jean-Francois Millet is most famous for the Sowers, which shows hard-scrabble peasants who seem like the wheat to be growing out of the earth. Millet was himself from the peasant class and refused to paint them in an idealistic manner, nor did he seek to show that hard labor brought happiness. The artist Honoré Daumier is best known for his cartoons that lifted the curtain on the corrupt politicians and legal system of the July monarchy. In his later years, he turned to painting and sculpture, with one of his most famous works being the Third Class Carriage, focusing on a group of French peasants, their faces creased with the legacy of their difficult lives, sitting in the obviously uncomfortable setting of the rail car. Realism in literature. Realism was also an important movement in literature, just as realist painters wanted to show the world the actual conditions of those on the bottom of the social order, so too did novelists like Charles Dickens, who used his brief experience in a blacking factory as the basis for his critique of industrialized society. In Hard Times, the noble working man, Stephen Blackpool, struggles against forces over which he had no control. He can't divorce his drunken wife and marry his beloved Rachel because divorce is available only to the wealthy. Meanwhile, he's falsely accused of being a troublemaker at work and finds himself unable to make a living. Such works, although at times a shade Maldine, introduced many middle-class individuals in Great Britain to the hardships of working-class life. Other realist authors focus on what they perceive to be barrenness of middle-class domestic life, and most notably the institution of marriage. One such writer was Mary Ann Evans, who wrote under the pseudonym George Eliot. In Middlemarch, her most important work, Eliot deals with English provincial life on the eve of the Great Reform Bill. Her main character, Dorothea Brooke, despite her own beauty, marries an unattractive older cleric named Casaubon in a failed hope that his scholarly ways will broaden her world. Although her second marriage to Casaubon's young cousin is a happy one, frustration still remains over her inability to realize her dream of improving the living conditions for their tenant farmers. Emma Bovary, the title character in Gustave Flaubert's Madame Bovary, marries a mediocre village doctor, only to find that reality is far different from the romantic notions of marriage she received from books. In search of excitement, she engages in a series of affairs, but the emptiness continues, and finally disappointment in love and financial failure lead her to commit suicide by taking arsenic. In Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, once again we have a beautiful but bored woman who engages in an affair that also meets with disastrous results. Tolstoy's fellow Russian Fyodor Dostoevsky was almost executed for his participation in an illegal political group, after which he was forced to spend 10 years in Siberia. The experience transformed him, pushing a conservative direction both his politics and his interest in the psychological and moral obligations of man, an interest that was revealed in his classical novels, Crime and Punishment and the Brothers Karamazov. Back in France, Émile Zola found himself applying the social sciences to the novel. Using this naturalistic technique, he wrote a series of novels dealing with the family over several generations, showing how environment and heredity were the critical factors in explaining their moral and physical degeneration. Zola also defended Alfred Dreyfus from charges of treason in his opening letter, J'accuse, which appeared on the front page of the French daily L'Or. Post-realist art, the Impressionists and Expressionists. Although some painters such as Edouard Manet were inspired by the realists, they wished to push their techniques in new directions. Manet's Luncheon on the Grass shows a rather peculiar picnic with two fully clothed males and a nude female. The work was in part startling to contemporaries because nudes were acceptable only if they were figures from classical mythology and not the people who packed the ham sandwiches. But besides the perplexing subject matter, Manet was changing the way we look at art. Dating back to the Renaissance and the introduction of the single-point perspective, painting served to open the window into another world. Now, however, instead of looking through the painting, Manet has to stop at the surface of the canvas, something that was to be pivotal of the development of modern art. Although Manet was a quiet man who was not looking to be controversial, he and other innovative artists of the day were to find themselves at the center of a controversy when they were not allowed to show their work at the official 1863 Salon, an annual public exhibition held in Paris. In response to the public outcry over the hanging committee's refusal to show these paintings, Napoleon III decided that the public should be given an opportunity to see them and make their own judgments, which led to the establishment of the Salon des Refusés, or Exhibition of the Rejected. Those artists who took the techniques of Manet are labeled Impressionists, although the term was initially used as one of derision after a critic first used it in 1874 to blast a work by Claude Monet entitled Impression Sunrise. Instead of shying away from the label, painters embraced it, with the exception of Manet, who refused to use it for his own work. Impressionists wanted to capture the shimmering effect of light. To do this, they were the first to take their easels outdoors. They were aided in this desire to leave their studios by the invention of portable paint tubes. Manet would take the same theme, such as a haystack or cathedral of ruin, and paint it at different times of day or different seasons to show how the impact of light would transform it. Although Manet is most famous for his landscapes, he didn't shy away from the scenes of modern life, such as railroad stations. Other impressionists like Auguste Renoir captured everyday scenes of such as couples flirting in a dance hall, or in the case of Edgar Degas, numerous works showing the behind-the-scenes world of the ballet. By the end of the 1880s, Impressionism, which had once seemed so revolutionary, had become widely accepted. Some artists, while acknowledging their debt to the Impressionists, wanted to push things even further. Paul Cézanne challenged traditional perspective, composition, and the use of color. His work had a great influence on the 20th century artists. He is therefore often referred to as the father of modern art. Cézanne said that he wanted to make Impressionism into something solid and durable, like the art of museums. Taking the forms of geometry that he believed were the most commonly found in nature, the cylinder, sphere, and cone, he took the somewhat abstract technique, using the landscapes applied to the numerous still lifes of fruit.